Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really foundational, something that could and probably should change how entire nations think about their wealth.
It's a huge topic. And this one comes from a very specific request.
It does, a request from you, our listener, who asked us to take a single chapter from a really fascinating work and essentially treat it like a movie script.
Right, go through it almost line by line, scene by scene, and really unpack the arguments.
The chapter is Nature as Wealth of Nations. It's chapter 33 from SKR's work, Zero to Infinity. And we're going to trace this central idea from its very beginnings in history all the way to policy debates happening right now.
And we have to say, the source material itself is, well, it's ambitious. The author, Sonu Kumar, or SKR, is aiming for a big, eye-opening kind of realization.
It's not just economics, is it?
Not at all. It weaves together science, mathematics, religious idioms, physics, cosmology. It's a really holistic attempt to get at some of these, as the author puts it, curious questions about what prosperity really is.
And there's a strong philosophical core to it. Before we even get to the first page of the chapter, we should probably set the stage with the author's framing.
Yeah, the book is dedicated to the immortal guru, the Lord Shiva, and it's influenced by this idea of a zero attraction of the world lifestyle.
Which might sound a little strange at first, right? A concept of detachment being used to define, of all things, national capital.
It does seem like a contradiction, but I think if you dig into it, the message is that true wealth has to be enduring and fundamental. It can't be based on, these fleeting man-made markets.
So if you're searching for what's real, what's foundational, you eventually land on nature.
That's the idea. And there's this ethical compass built into the text as well, with the acronym LEGEND.
Let's spell that out. It's L legacy, E even, G G-O-A-D, it N not D, demons.
So you can see this framing right away.
Yeah.
It's a struggle between a lasting godly legacy and these destructive short-term forces, the demons.
So in our context, legacy is nature, it's life. And the demons are, what, short-sighted extraction, profit at all costs?
Precisely. It sets up the whole economic debate, not as a simple choice between options, but as a kind of existential responsibility.
And the placement of this chapter is really powerful, too. It's the last chapter in Unit 3, the 5 diamonds of nations in Earth.
Right. And just for context, the other 4 diamonds are listed as the Constitution, kids, youth, and population.
Think about that. The author is placing nature on the same level of non-negotiable importance as a nation's system of law and its own people, its own future.
It's not an amenity. It's not an optional extra. It's presented as an inherent core asset.
And that's the thesis for our deep dive today. The chapter really kicks off by talking about how we've always measured wealth. Gold reserves, industrial output.
Military might,
Yeah.
GDP, the usual suspects. That's the old script.
The old script. I like that. And the new script, the one we're analyzing today, proposes that the real wealth, the original form of national capital, isn't in a vault or a stock market report.
It's in the earth itself. The forests, the rivers, the soil, the biodiversity, the climate system.
Yeah.
That is the original and, crucially, the most enduring capital a nation will ever have.
So our job today is to follow that argument. To see how this idea isn't just a nice thought, but something backed up by history, justified by economics, and maybe most importantly, something we can actually implement with policy.
It's a complete redefinition of what it means for a nation to be rich.
Okay, so let's start the film. Act 1. The historical roots. Where does this idea even come from? The source takes us back to 18th century France.
Yeah, to the physiocratic revelation. And what's so fascinating is that this idea that true wealth comes from the land is actually older than the form of capitalism we know today.
So before Adam Smith, even.
Before the Wealth of Nations, yes.
Yeah.
You have this movement in France, the physiocrats, led by a man named Francois Canoë. And they were pushing back against the dominant economic theory of their day.
Which was mercantilism.
Exactly. Mercantile.
And mercantilism was, well, it was all about accumulation, right?
A totally zero-sum game. The thinking was that there's a fixed amount of wealth in the world, and for your nation to get richer, another nation had to get poorer.
And wealth was measured in gold, bullion, whatever you could physically stack in the treasury.
Right. You get rich by exporting as much as you can, importing as little as you can, and hoarding the gold you get from the difference.
So into this world comes Canoë. And he's a physician, which I think is interesting. He's used to thinking about systems, about flows, about the health of the body.
That's a great point. He looked at the French economy and saw all this activity, manufacturing, trade, And he argued that it was just, well, moving existing value around. It wasn't creating anything fundamentally new
So where did new value come from?
from the land. He argued that the only true source of wealth, of a genuine surplus, was the productivity of the land itself, agriculture.
So a blacksmith could turn iron into a horseshoe, adding labor value, but the farmer was the only one who could plant one seed and get back 10, a net surplus, a gift from nature.
Exactly. He actually called manufacturing and trade sterile activities. Not useless, not unimportant, but sterile in the sense that they didn't generate that magical surplus that nature provided. The farmer was the true engine of the economy.
He even drew it all out, didn't he?
He did. In his Tableau économique, which is one of the very first economic models ever created, it was this complex diagram showing how wealth, originating from the agricultural sector, flowed through the entire economy and supported all the other sterile sectors like artisans and merchants.
So for the physiocrats, the land wasn't just a source of wealth, it was the source of wealth, the sovereign capital of the nation, a very, very nature-centric view.
It was completely radical for its time.
So here's the big question. If this idea was so foundational, so early in modern economic thought, what happened? How did we lose it so completely? The source calls what happens next the Great Erasure.
Well, this is the major plot twist of the economic story, right? The Industrial Revolution happens, and it just changes everything.
I think because shifts.
The focus shifts entirely. You have classical economists, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and they start focusing on labor and produced capital machines factories as the real drivers of value.
And then came neoclassical economics in the late 19th century.
And by then, the process was basically complete. Nature was, for all intents and purposes, written out of the equation. It was just taken for granted.
Why, though? How could something so fundamental just be assumed away?
It was simplified. In the economic models, nature just became a single input called land. Or even more often, it wasn't even modeled explicitly. It was just treated as a raw, infinitely available resource.
A free or infinite input. That's the exact phrase from the source, and it feels like the original sin of modern economics.
It is. Think about it. Clean air, fresh water, a stable climate, the ability of the oceans to absorb pollution. In the mathematical models that came to dominate economics, all of these things had a price of zero.
And if something has a price of zero,
You use as much of it as you want. There's no incentive to conserve it. It created this intellectual fault line, this massive gap between the economic models and physical reality.
so economists could build these elegant models predicting endless exponential growth because there were no biophysical limits baked into the system, no constraints.
The economic narrative completely detached from biological reality. The economy was all about human capital, produced capital, financial capital. The biosphere was just this external thing, a sort of passive warehouse of resources and a convenient dumping ground for waste.
And that works for a while. It works as long as the human economy is relatively small compared to the planet.
But then it stops working. And the late 20th century was when all the warning lights started flashing at once.
Yeah.
The source calls this the ecological wake-up call.
The evidence just became undeniable. Widespread deforestation, acid rain, holes in the ozone layer, escalating pollution, mass extinction.
The system was very clearly failing to account for the stability of its own foundation. And this crisis forced a major reevaluation. It led directly to the birth of a new field, ecological economics.
And the source points to a few key pioneers here.
Yes, people like Herman Daly, Kenneth Boulding, and later Elinor Ostrom, thinkers who were brave enough to say the emperor has no clothes, that the mainstream model is broken.
What was their core contribution? What was the big idea?
Daly, for example, pushed the idea of a steady-state economy, arguing that endless physical growth on a finite planet is a logical impossibility.
And Boulding had that great analogy.
The spaceship analogy. He said we had to shift our thinking from a cowboy economy, where you see the world as this open, infinite frontier to be exploited, to a spaceman economy.
Where you're on a closed, finite spaceship.
Exactly. Every resource has to be managed, recycled, and cared for, because there's nowhere else to go. It was a complete paradigm shift.
So if the physiocrats were the first revelation, these thinkers, the ecological economists, they represent the new paradigm that's really driving the author's whole argument.
And their foundational principle, the one that corrects the Great Erasure, is incredibly simple but profound. They put the economy inside the biosphere.
A diagrammatic reversal.
Completely. Instead of nature being a small subset of the economy, a little circle for resources, the economy is shown as what it actually is. a fully dependent subsystem embedded within a much larger, finite, and non-growing biosphere.
Which means that all economic activity is ultimately constrained by the laws of physics and biology.
It has to be. It introduces the concept of sustainable scale. It's not about stopping progress. It's about making sure our economy fits within the environmental envelope that supports it.
So we've come full circle. From wealth as gold to wealth as agricultural surplus, and now to wealth as the entire living infrastructure of the planet.
The life support system itself.
Okay, so that's the history. That sets the stage. Let's dig into the core concept itself. Natural capital. What exactly is it, and how does it work?
Right, so the source gives us a really clear definition to work with. It's the world's stock of natural assets. And that includes everything: geological, biological, hydrological.
So not just minerals and timber.
No, much broader. It's the air, the water, the soil, the forest, the fisheries. It's the living systems themselves, not just the extractable stuff.
And the chapter does a great job of breaking down how this capital actually provides value. It's not just sitting there, it's actively providing services, ecosystem services.
And understanding these services is the key to understanding why this capital is so valuable. The source breaks them down into three main categories.
Let's go through them. First up, regulating services.
These are basically the free, planetary-scale engineering jobs that nature does for us. They stabilize everything.
And the source gives some great examples. Climate regulation.
A huge one. Forests and oceans absorb and store massive amounts of carbon dioxide, which keeps our climate relatively stable and predictable. Without that service, our entire global economy would be thrown into chaos by extreme weather. It's an unbelievably valuable service.
Flood control is another one. And I think this is something people see in their own communities, but maybe don't think of in these terms.
For sure. A healthy wetland, a mangrove forest, a river floodplain. These are natural infrastructure. They act like giant sponges, soaking up storm surge and heavy rainfall.
And they are far cheaper and more effective than building concrete seawalls and massive drainage systems.
Orders of magnitude cheaper. And they provide other benefits at the same time. Then there's water purification, healthy soil, riparian buffers along rivers. These things act as natural filtration systems.
Saving municipalities billions of dollars in water treatment costs.
Absolutely. And the last big regulating service mentioned is pollination. It's what is maybe the most direct link between nature and what's on our dinner plate.
Yeah, it's easy to take for granted because it's often invisible, done by bees and butterflies and birds.
But it's completely irreplaceable by technology at a global scale. It's the foundation of so much of our food system, and even industries like timber. These regulating services are, in essence, the planet's insurance policy for our civilization.
Okay, so that's regulating services. The second category is cultural services. These are maybe a bit harder to put a dollar value on.
They are, and that's
Okay.
why traditional economics often ignores them. But they are absolutely essential for human well-being. These are the non-material benefits we get from nature.
Like recreation.
Recreation is a huge one. Hiking, fishing, camping, wildlife watching. These activities support massive industries like tourism and outdoor equipment. They generate real jobs and real revenue.
And then there's spiritual enrichment.
A sense of awe, of connection, of identity that people get from landscapes or certain species. This has profound impacts on mental health, on social cohesion. It's a huge part of what makes life worth living.
Along with aesthetic inspiration. So much of our art, our design, our architecture is inspired by natural forms.
Even our technology, through biomimicry. So when you lose, say, a pristine old-growth forest to clear-cutting, you don't just lose the timber and the carbon storage, you lose an irreplaceable cultural and spiritual asset. GDP might tick up for a year from the logging, but the nation's true wealth, its human capital stock, is diminished forever.
Which brings us to the third and final category, supporting services.
These are the ones that are even more fundamental. They're the deep, slow-moving biological and geological processes that make everything else possible. They're the foundation of the foundation.
I mean, so what are we talking about here?
Nutrient cycling is one, the continuous movement of essential elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon through the ecosystem. Without this, plants can't grow. The whole system shuts down.
Soil formation is another.
A critical one. It can take hundreds, even thousands of years to form a single inch of fertile topsoil. It's the medium for almost all of our food production, yet we treat it like dirt.
Literally. And the final one listed is primary production.
Which is just a scientific term for photosynthesis, the process where plants convert sunlight into chemical energy. This is the base of virtually every food web on the planet.
So without these supporting services, you don't get the regulating services or the cultural services.
You don't get anything. The whole economic system dies before it even starts. The source is really clear on this point. If a nation is degrading its supporting services, it's not just spending its inheritance, it's destroying the family business.
So here's the billion-dollar question, the paradox at the heart of the chapter. If these services are so obviously crucial, why does the global economy act like they're worthless? This gets us to the GDP blind spot.
And this is where the numbers are just shocking. The source cites a report from the UN Environment Program, their Inclusive Wealth Report. And the statistic is, well, it's staggering.
What is it?
It finds that over 80% of global ecosystem services have been degraded in just the last 50 years.
80% in half a century. That is a catastrophic failure of management. We are literally eating our life support system.
And yet, through most of that period, global GDP went up and up. The primary metric we use to measure success failed to even register this colossal loss.
Because GDP just measures throughput. It measures the flow of money. When you cut down a forest, GDP counts the wages of the loggers and the price of the lumber.
Right. But it doesn't subtract the value of the lost carbon sequestration. It doesn't subtract the increased flood risk downstream or the value of the biodiversity that was wiped out.
So as the source says, it creates a dangerous illusion of sustained growth while natural wealth erodes. It's like a company celebrating record sales while ignoring the fact that its factory is collapsing.
It's worse than that in some ways. GDP often counts the cleanup from environmental disasters as a positive thing for the economy.
Right, an oil spill happens and suddenly there's all this economic activity, cleanup crews, new equipment, lawsuits.
And GDP goes up. It's a completely perverse accounting system that can actually incentivize destruction.
The chapter gives a perfect real-world example of this in action, the palm oil boom in Indonesia.
This is such a clear case study of capital liquidation being disguised as economic growth.
So walk us through it. What happened?
Well, there's massive global demand for palm oil. It's in everything. So billions of dollars pour into Indonesia to expand plantations. And from a pure GDP perspective, it looks like a huge success story.
Exports are booming, there are jobs being created, industrial output is up.
The GDP numbers look fantastic, but the source points to the hidden cost on the other side of the ledger. To create these plantations, there was massive deforestation, and specifically the clearing and draining of ancient carbon-rich peatland forests.
And peatlands are one of the most dense carbon stores on the planet. When you drain them and they oxidize,
You release colossal amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You're turning a vital regulating service carbon storage into a massive global liability and emission source.
so the source calls this effectively liquidating natural capital for short-term gain.
That's exactly what it is. You're taking a complex, long-term asset, a forest, providing clean water, climate stability, biodiversity, and converting it into a one-time cash withdrawal. And GDP only counts the cash. It doesn't count the withdrawal from the natural capital account. It told Indonesia it was winning, while its true national balance sheet was bleeding red ink.
This leads us straight into the next big theme of the chapter, which is debunking this idea that you have to choose between a healthy economy and a healthy environment.
Yes, this persistent myth, this false dichotomy that has paralyzed good policy for decades.
The argument you always hear is that environmental regulations kill jobs, they hinder development.
And the source is just unequivocal on this. It argues that sustainable stewardship of nature is not an obstacle to prosperity. It is the absolute prerequisite for any kind of long-term resilient prosperity.
So protecting nature isn't a cost, it's an investment.
It's an investment in your most essential infrastructure. And the chapter details the specific economic vulnerabilities that arise when you fail to make that investment.
Let's start with the most basic one. Food. Agriculture and pollination.
This isn't an abstract risk. It's a direct exposure for the entire agricultural sector. The statistic cited is just stunning. 75% of global food crops depend on animal pollination.
75%. That's 1 in every 3 bites of food you take.
It's apples, almonds, coffee, chocolate, tomatoes. The list is enormous. So when bee populations and other wild pollinator populations decline, which they are because of habitat loss and pesticide use, that's a direct hit to the economy.
It means lower crop yields. It means farmers have to pay to rent commercial hives. It means higher food prices for everyone.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar service that nature provides for free, and we are systematically dismantling the infrastructure that provides it.
Okay, from food security to water security. The chapter talks about the hydrological role of forests.
Forests are basically water regulators. They absorb rainfall, recharge groundwater, and ensure a steady, reliable flow of water throughout the year.
And the example used to illustrate this is so powerful because it crosses borders. It shows how interconnected these systems are.
It's the example of deforestation in the Himalayas. When you cut down those forests on the mountain slopes, the rainwater isn't absorbed and released slowly anymore. It just rushes downhill.
Which has two different but equally devastating economic impacts downstream.
Exactly. First, it massively increases the risk of catastrophic flooding in places like Bangladesh. So you get huge costs for disaster relief, for rebuilding homes and infrastructure.
And at the same time, because the water all came down in a rush, it means there's less water available during the dry season.
Right, so it simultaneously reduces the crucial dry season water flow for millions of people and farms in the Indus and Ganges basins. An act of liquidating natural capital in one country creates billions in disaster costs and agricultural losses in others. That Himalayan forest is an international economic asset.
And the final vulnerability the chapter points to is climate resilience. Basically, nature as our first line of defense.
We're talking about natural infrastructure, like mangrove forests and coral reefs, protecting coastlines from storms.
A healthy mangrove forest can absorb a huge amount of storm surge energy.
It can reduce wave height by several feet. It directly protects coastal communities, ports, power plants, cities. The source makes the point that when you destroy these natural buffers, the cost of disaster recovery, which is paid for out of national treasuries, goes way up.
And the studies on this are clear, right? It's always cheaper to protect the mangrove forest than to build a concrete seawall to do the same job.
It's not even close. You're just transferring a massive future liability onto the public balance sheet by destroying that natural capital today.
So if the argument is that stewardship is good for the economy, we need a positive example, a nation that actually did this and succeeded.
And the chapter gives us the global poster child for this, Costa Rica.
Costa Rica basically provides the blueprint for how to do this in the real world.
They did. Back in the 80s and 90s, they had one of the highest deforestation rates in the world. They were on the typical trajectory. But then they made a radical policy shift.
They started their payments for ecosystem services, PES program.
Yes. This was groundbreaking. They decided to treat the services their forests provided, like carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, clean water, as actual economic goods that were worth paying for.
So how did it work? Who was paying and who was getting paid?
The money came from a few sources, mainly a dedicated tax on fuel and water. So the people using the resources that depend on a healthy environment were paying into the fund.
And that money went to
Landowners. Farmers and other landowners were paid an annual fee to conserve the forest on their property or to reforest land that had been cleared. It directly compensated them for the opportunity costs of not cutting it down for cattle ranching or farming.
It made the standing forest more valuable than the cleared land. A simple, powerful economic incentive.
A very powerful incentive. And the results were just incredible. They completely reversed their deforestation trend. Today, over half the country is covered in forest again.
But here's the key question for debunking that false dichotomy. What happened to their economy?
This is the punchline. Over the same period that they were making these massive investments in their natural capital, they doubled their GDP per capita. They built a world-leading ecotourism industry that's now a pillar of their economy.
So they proved it. You can grow your economy and restore your environment at the same time.
They proved that investing in nature pays huge economic dividends. It's the ultimate rebuttal to that old, tired argument.
Okay, so if the core problem is that our primary metric, GDP, is broken, the solution has to involve new metrics, new ways of measuring.
Exactly. This is the how-to section of the chapter. If you want governments to treat nature as wealth, you first have to give them the tools to count it. Measurement is the first step to management.
It makes it real. If a finance minister sees a line item for wetland asset depreciation on the national accounts, that changes the whole conversation.
It changes everything. So the chapter details the accounting frameworks that have been designed to do exactly this, to bring nature onto the balance sheet.
Let's start the big one, the UN's framework. The System of Environmental Economic Accounting, the SEE.
The SEE is the global gold standard for this. It's a comprehensive framework that's designed to be fully integrated with the existing system of national accounts, the system that produces GDP. So it speaks the same language as economists.
And it's not just one number, right? It's a whole system.
It's a whole system. It has three main parts. First, you have physical flow accounts.
Which track? What?
They track the physical flows of materials and energy from the environment into the economy and back out again as waste. So you can see exactly how many cubic meters of water the agricultural sector is using or how many tons of CO2 the energy sector is emitting. It makes the physical reality visible.
Okay. Then the second part is asset accounts.
This is where you track the total stock of your natural resources over time. The opening stock of timber, minerals, water at the start of the year, and the closing stock at the end. It tells you, point blank, whether you're running a surplus or a deficit on your natural wealth.
And the third, and maybe most ambitious part, is the ecosystem accounts.
This is the cutting edge. This moves beyond just counting tons of timber or barrels of oil. It tries to map the extent and condition of your ecosystems, your wetlands, your forests, and then measure the flow of services they provide, like water filtration or recreation, in both physical and monetary terms.
And this framework is being put into practice through what's called Natural Capital Accounting, or NCA.
Right. NCA is the practical application of the CA framework. And the chapter notes that this isn't some niche academic idea anymore. Over 90 countries are now in the process of adopting it.
Including some major economies.
Yes, the source specifically mentions the UK, India, and South Africa. This is becoming mainstream.
It has to be incredibly difficult to implement, though. What are the big challenges?
The biggest one is always valuation. It's relatively easy to value timber. It's much, much harder to put a credible dollar figure on a service like pollination or spiritual enrichment.
So how do they do it?
They use a range of methods. Sometimes it's replacement cost. What would it cost us to build a water treatment plant to do the job this wetland is doing for free? Sometimes it's avoided damage cost. How much flood damage did this mangrove forest prevent? It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than the current value, which is zero.
Okay, so that's the comprehensive accounting. But there are also simpler indicators designed to be a direct alternative to GDP. The chapter talks about the Genuine Progress Indicator, the GPI.
The GPI is designed to be a much more honest measure of economic well-being. It starts with the same personal consumption data that GDP uses, but then it makes a series of crucial adjustments.
It adds some things and subtracts others. What does it subtract?
This is the key part. It subtracts the costs of environmental degradation, the cost of air and water pollution, the depletion of natural resources. It treats them like a capital loss, which they are. It also subtracts social costs, like the cost of crime and family breakdown.
And what does it add?
It adds the value of things GDP completely ignores, but that are vital to our well-being. Things like the value of household work, volunteer work, and parenting.
So if a factory opens and GDP goes up because of its output, but it creates a lot of pollution that makes people sick, the GPI would go down.
The GPI would subtract the healthcare costs and the environmental damage, so yes, it would likely show a net loss in well-being, providing a much more accurate picture than GDP. It's like an internal auditor for the economy.
And when you apply this kind of honest accounting globally, the results are pretty grim.
The source cites a World Bank estimate that is just devastating. It found that global natural capital per person declined by nearly 40% between 1992 and 2014.
40%. And the chapter makes the critical point that this happened while our other forms of capital were growing.
Exactly. During that same period, produced capital, our infrastructure, our machines grew. And human capital, our education, our skills also grew. So we were getting richer in conventional terms, but we were financing that growth by liquidating our natural inheritance at a terrifying rate.
We were living off the principal, not the interest.
We were. But the chapter gives a fantastic example of how this new kind of accounting can completely change policy for the better. The case study of Botswana.
So Botswana's economy is famous for one thing, really, diamonds.
It's hugely dependent on diamond mining. But they did something revolutionary. When they started developing their natural capital accounts, they included not just their diamond reserves, but also their wildlife.
Their elephants.
Their massive elephant herds, their incredible biodiversity. And this wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It had real political and economic consequences.
How so? What happens when you put an elephant on a national balance sheet?
You start to see its true economic value. They calculated the revenue from wildlife tourism, the jobs it created, the foreign currency it brought in, and they realized that a living elephant was an incredibly valuable economic asset.
Not a liability or just a creature to be conserved for ethical reasons. It was a contributor to the economy.
A major contributor. And once you've quantified that, it makes it much, much easier to justify spending real money to protect that asset. It created the economic rationale for investing heavily in anti-poaching patrols, in community conservation programs, in sustainable tourism infrastructure.
It's that eye-opening realization the author of Zero to Infinity is talking about. When you measure what matters, you start to manage what matters.
It's a perfect example.
So this journey forces us to look beyond just modern economics. The source has a really important section on indigenous wisdom, acknowledging that some cultures never made the mistake of forgetting nature's value.
This is such a critical point. If we're looking for sustainable models, we shouldn't just look at academic papers. We need to look at cultures that have been living sustainably for millennia.
And the statistic here is just incredible. Indigenous peoples make up only about 5% of the world's population.
Yet they are the stewards of an estimated 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity.
That's not a coincidence. That is the result of a fundamentally different worldview and a more effective management model.
It really is. The source highlights that in many indigenous worldviews, nature isn't seen as a commodity, as a collection of resources to be exploited. It's seen as a living relative.
A source of identity, a partner in a relationship of reciprocity, something you have a responsibility to care for across generations.
Which is the polar opposite of the short-term extractive mindset that has dominated the last few centuries.
And the chapter gives some powerful, specific examples of these alternative paradigms in action.
It does. It talks about the Maori concept of Kaitiakitanga in New Zealand, guardianship.
Which is more than just a spiritual idea, right? It's becoming part of the legal system.
It is. It's a governance principle that embeds the duty to protect resources for future generations directly into law and policy. It's why you see things in New Zealand like a river being granted legal personhood.
And then there's the Andean principle of sumak kawasi, or buen vivir.
Good living. This is an even more profound challenge to the Western economic model. It's written into the constitutions of Ecuador and Bolivia.
And what does it say?
It fundamentally rejects the idea that endless GDP growth and material accumulation should be the goal of society. Instead, the goal is collective well-being, social harmony, and living in balance with nature. It champions local, regenerative economies. These aren't just quaint ideas, they are fully formed alternative economic pathways.
And the contrast between that wisdom and our current path really highlights the stakes. The chapter then pivots to the existential risks of continuing to ignore nature's value.
If we don't make this shift, these problems stop being environmental issues and start becoming national security crises.
The first one listed is resource conflicts.
This is already happening. As essential natural capital like fresh water becomes more scarce, it becomes a major driver of geopolitical tension and conflict.
The source points to places like the Nile Basin,
where there's huge tension over dam construction and water rights, or the Indus River, which is shared by two nuclear-armed powers, India and Pakistan. Water scarcity is a massive conflict multiplier.
Then there's the risk of outright economic collapse in sectors that depend directly on natural capital.
A classic example given is overfishing. From the collapse of the cod fishery in Newfoundland to the devastation of coastal communities in West Africa.
What happens is that the natural capital stock, the fish population, is exploited beyond its ability to regenerate.
It's pushed past its maximum sustainable yield, and the entire stock collapses. And with it, the entire industry and the communities that depended on it. You get mass unemployment, social breakdown, a crisis that can last for generations.
And the third risk is one that feels incredibly close to home for all of us now: pandemics.
The scientific link here is now undeniable. As we destroy habitats, particularly tropical forests, through deforestation and development, we increase the amount of contact between humans, our livestock, and wild animal populations.
And those wild populations carry novel viruses.
Exactly. This habitat fragmentation creates the perfect conditions for zoonotic spillover, for diseases to jump from animals to humans. The source explicitly links this to diseases like Ebola, SARS, and of course, COVID-19. So destroying nature doesn't just hurt the economy. It actively creates global public health and security crises.
And this all leads to a kind of crescendo in the chapter, a stark warning from a major mainstream economic report.
Yes, the 2021 Dasgupta Review, which was commissioned by, of all places, the UK Treasury, the heart of the financial establishment.
So this isn't a fringe environmental group. This is the government's own economists.
And their conclusion is just absolutely chilling and unambiguous. The quote from the source is worth reading in full. Our economies are embedded within nature, not external to it. We are depleting our natural assets at an alarming rate. It is not an exaggeration to say that humanity sits at a crossroads.
Wow. Humanity sits at a crossroads. That's about as direct as it gets. It's the ultimate finding. We have the history, we have the data, we see the risks. The choice is now.
It's a matter of institutional survival at this point.
Which is the perfect transition to the final section of the chapter. If we're at a crossroads, we need to choose a path. This is all about the specific policy changes we need to make. moving from theory to action.
It's about taking this idea of nature as wealth and actually institutionalizing it, making it a core principle of how we govern,
And the first step is integrating natural capital directly into national planning.
moving it out of the silo of the Environment Ministry and putting it at the center of the Finance Ministry, the Planning Ministry, the Treasury.
So what does that look like in practice, in a budget meeting?
It means that every major infrastructure project, a new dam, a new highway, a mining permit, has to go through a rigorous natural capital assessment. You have to quantify the value of the ecosystem services that will be lost and weigh that against the projected economic benefits.
So you can't build a highway through a wetland without formally accounting for the cost of the lost flood protection and water filtration.
Exactly. You're forced to recognize that you're not just building something, you're also destroying something of value. You have to account for the debt you're incurring on the natural balance sheet.
The next policy is a big one and politically very difficult. Ending perverse subsidies.
This is absolutely critical because right now, governments around the world spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year actively paying industries to destroy nature.
The source specifically calls out fossil fuel subsidies and subsidies for industrial fishing fleets.
These subsidies make environmentally destructive activities artificially profitable. They distort the market and hide the true costs. Reforming these isn't about punishing industries. It's about stopping the use of public money to subsidize our own destruction.
But the politics of that are a nightmare, right? These industries are powerful.
They are. But the economic argument is that you're freeing up huge amounts of public capital that can be redirected toward innovation, toward supporting regenerative alternatives, toward a just transition for workers. You're letting the market finally reflect true cost.
The policy list also includes proactive conservation.
Of course, expanding the network of protected areas on land and in the ocean. But crucially, the chapter emphasizes supporting community-based conservation.
Empowering the local and indigenous communities who are often the most effective stewards.
Because they have the knowledge and the long-term stake in the health of the ecosystem. It's about seeing conservation as a vital investment in economic stability.
And then there's a more fundamental structural shift, adopting circular economy models.
This is the operational opposite of the current linear take-make-waste model. A circular economy is designed from the ground up to eliminate waste, keep materials in circulation, and most importantly, to actively regenerate natural systems.
What does that regeneration piece look like?
It means things like regenerative agriculture that rebuilds soil health instead of depleting it. It means using biological materials that can be safely returned to the biosphere. For a nation, it means drastically reducing your reliance on extracting virgin resources, which takes huge pressure off your natural capital stock.
And the final policy recommendation is maybe the most profound of all, recognizing the legal rights of nature.
This is a fundamental shift in our legal framework. It means moving from a system where nature is treated as property, which humans have a right to own and destroy, to one where nature itself has a right to exist, to flourish, and to be defended in court.
The source mentioned the precedents in Ecuador, Colombia, and New Zealand.
The Wanganui River in New Zealand being granted the legal rights of a person is the famous example. It means that if someone pollutes the river, they haven't just damaged property. They have harmed a legal entity with rights. It creates a powerful legal firewall against exploitation.
And finally, since these are global problems, the solutions have to be global too.
Yes, the policy section concludes by stressing the need for international financial mechanisms to align with this new reality. Things like debt for nature swaps, where a portion of a developing country's debt is forgiven in exchange for protecting a critical ecosystem like a rainforest.
And scaling up things like green bonds to channel trillions in private investment away from extractive industries and toward regenerative ones.
It's about rewiring the entire global financial system to recognize that ecological integrity and economic prosperity are, in the end, the same thing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, this script analysis, it's clear the story has a very powerful central theme. Nature isn't just one part of the economy. It's the stage upon which the entire human drama unfolds. It is the foundation.
And we've seen the whole arc of the story. The historical mistake of treating that foundation as free and infinite. The rising crisis as the foundation begins to crack. And now, the proposed solution. A radical but necessary shift to a system that finally measures, values, and invests in our planetary life support system.
The source closes with that really powerful bankrupting analogy. A nation that cuts down its forests, drains its rivers, and pollutes its air might see its GDP go up for a little while.
But it is effectively bankrupting its future.
Yeah.
It's creating the illusion of prosperity today by taking out a massive, unpayable ecological debt that it will hand to the next generation.
And true wealth, enduring wealth, the legend, the legacy, even God and not demons, is found in the resilience of those systems, in clean air, clean water, healthy soil, and thriving biodiversity.
That's the real capital, the only capital that ultimately matters.
We saw how Botswana changed its entire national strategy once it put its elephants on the balance sheet. We saw how the principle of buen vivir reorients a whole society toward well-being instead of just accumulation. It changes everything.
So I want to leave you with a final thought, something to take away from this. It builds on that skip to review warning that we're at a crossroads. We are depleting our natural capital so fast because its value is invisible in our current system.
So here's the provocation. Imagine if, starting tomorrow, the economic value of the clean air generated by the parks in your city or the flood protection provided by your local river and its wetlands was officially calculated and put on your nation's balance sheet.
And every time that value was degraded by pollution or development, the government had to publicly report a direct financial loss to the national wealth. How would your city's budget priorities, its investment decisions, its zoning laws, how would all of that change almost overnight?
What becomes unacceptable when its true cost is finally made visible? That's the meaning of the concept from the book Earth Enduring, but not indefinitely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Zero